Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman here, as always, with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, we are continuing our cram session on the Texas Longhorns football team this year. Last time we did the SEC championship game, which is a game that I think you and I probably both watched at least most of the first time, although kind of passively. This one was the Clemson game, the first round of the college football playoffs, and I'm thinking, why do I not remember any of this game? It's like, oh yeah, because we were running around like crazy in the hours before the Ohio State-Tennessee postseason game, and literally I did not watch a second of this. I watched some of the Penn State SMU game, and this I just sort of like saw scores on the scoreboard periodically. I was like, oh, well, I bet that was interesting.
Yeah, I would see scores periodically looking over as I'm doing whatever, and it was not close for a while. Then it got close, so you start watching it again, and then Texas running back Jaden Blue goes for about 77 yards and makes it not close again. It's like, well, back to work. Let's just this game is over. Oh, and of course Texas wins 38-24. And they were up 28-10 in the at halftime in this one. And they had, checking my notes, 289 yards of total offense in the first half compared to 165 for Clemson. Then they had 205, I think, in the second half as they could kind of dial it down a little bit. But Tom, I'm confused by Texas's offense because in this one, they rushed for 292 yards, and they were coming off of a game against Georgia where they rushed for like 30 yards. And then in their next game against Arizona State, they rushed for like 50 yards. This one, they were killing Clemson on the outside zone. I saw a stat they averaged 10.8 yards per carry on the outside zone in this. Credit some of that to a 77-yard run and like another like 37-yard run or something in there. But I'm watching this, and Jaden Blue looks outstanding. He rushes for over 100 yards, and he doesn't really play much, get much carries in the game before this and the game after this. And so I'm puzzled about this running game for Texas because I feel like they're not this, the 292 yards rushing, but they have the potential to be this. So you can't just like wash it away, just dismiss it because they have that potential. But this is a strange outlier for me.
Okay, so I can't tell if you're setting me up to look smart or if I just did the right homework to look smart here. Tony, I'm going to read you the average yards per rush allowed this year by Texas's last three opponents. Ready?
Mm-hmm.
Georgia, against whom they rushed for 31 yards. Georgia gives up an average of 3.71 yards per carry. That's 32nd in the country. Clemson, against whom they ran for 7.3 miles, Clemson allows 4.71 yards per carry, 99th in the nation. Arizona State, who they ran for, again, like 48, 50 yards against, 3.68 yards per carry, 29th in the country. So Arizona State, 29th, Georgia, 32nd, Clemson, 99th. And we'll just put it in perspective since we're talking about the Cotton Bowl. Ohio State, 2.72 yards per carry allowed, second in the nation. Any follow-up questions, counselor?
Well, I will also tell you this. I was watching a PFF podcast talking about this game, and they mentioned that Ohio State has the best defense in the nation against the outside zone. And so when this is what Texas does very successfully a third of the time this season, which is a big number, and then maybe you match it up against what Ohio State does very, very well, there may not be any there for Texas, but there certainly was in this one. And they were then able to run power. They were able to run other things successfully. And it's not like they're doing it because of the fear of the pass. I wonder how talented this Clemson team is overall. I think everybody likes Sammy Brown, the young linebacker, and they've got some pieces here, but you saw corners grabbing. You saw offensively a lack of overall talent in the backfield. And so this was not a great matchup for Clemson, I think. But still, you look at what they were able to do, what Texas was able to do on the ground. I think that is something to certainly pay attention to, but I'm not expecting a day like that. Now, Caleb Downs, Lathan Ransom, they will need to tackle. They will need to make that tackle in the hole there, and they've generally done that. Clemson wasn't able to do that.
No, not at all. Clemson's safety play didn't look great in this game. Ohio State's safety play has been among the best in the nation this season. But it did strike me how different that Texas offense looks when they're able to run the ball. There was a point in the first 2 drives where they ran the ball 10 out of 11 plays. And it was, you had Quintravian Wisner. He got involved early in both the ground and the pass game. They threw him the ball a couple times out of the backfield, but he had some big runs, and then he got hurt right before halftime. And then you saw more Jaden Blue in the second half, and Jaden Blue had some big runs as well. He had a 38-yarder in the first half that you mentioned, 77-yarder late in the game to kind of seal it. But they mentioned on the broadcast he'd lost 4 fumbles this season. So, in terms of, he looks great when he has the ball in his hand. Why doesn't he play more? That's probably the answer. That if you want to lose your carries, putting the ball on the ground and having the other team get it is a great way to do that. I mean, even Jarrett Gibson, who they put in at the end of the game because Wisner was out, and I think they were just trying to, get Blue, get Blue a couple snaps off. Jarrett Gibson, who's a little bit of a bigger back, they put him in towards the end just to kind of pound the ball between the tackles. He was dragons of people pushing the pile. But they said he had fumble problems as well this year. So, looking at the Ohio State Texas matchup, you can't put the ball on the ground if you're Texas. Like you're a little bit of an underdog. There's some we can talk about some potential matchup issues that Texas may have in this game that they definitely did not have in the Clemson game. But you're in a spot where you can't afford turnovers because Ohio State probably has you outmanned in a number of spots around the field. So you're going to have to play close to perfect. Now, if they can run the ball like this against Ohio State, that would substantially change my opinion on how that game's going to go. I don't think they're going to be able to run the ball on Ohio State. Certainly not like they did against Clemson, but between the 31 yards against Georgia and the 50 or whatever it was against Arizona State and the 290 or whatever it was against Clemson, I would guess they finished between 50 and 290, which is, not exactly a profiles and courage kind of prediction, but if they run for 75 yards, is that a game that they can win without being, +2, +3 in turnovers? They have to run for 100. They have to run for 120. Like what's the magic number for Texas on the ground where you kind of think like, they might have like enough balance there to maybe be able to move the ball to enough to score 20 something?
Yeah, I think that 120 is a good number. But again, is there a 60-yarder in there that skews everything? Or is this, 34-yard carries or 43-yard carries? I think that the lack of running game this of late has been a disaster in the red zone as well. And you've seen Arch Manning brought in as the red zone quarterback, Tom. And as you know, when you have a red zone quarterback, you have red zone issues, and they will show up at any given time when you're down there. And so in their last 4 games, Texas has scored touchdowns on 6 of 16 red zone trips. And in their last 3 in the postseason, they are 4 of 11, and 3 of those came against Clemson in this game. So when they're not able to run the ball against Georgia and Arizona State, they are 1 for 6 on scoring touchdowns in the red zone. And they're going to need to be, 3 of 4 at the very least. They need to be, hitting 75% of those things when they play Ohio State, because you can't come up short in the red zone and rely on field goals, especially when your field goal kicker can be a little bit iffy. So the inability to run when it's there has killed them in the red zone. And even when they can run, they were still 3 of 5 in the red zone scoring touchdowns and 4 or 5 overall in this one.
Yeah, that's going to be a big problem if they're not scoring consistently and putting up 6s instead of 3s in the red zone. And Ohio State in the red zone, in terms of red zone touchdowns allowed this year, 41% of opponent red zone possessions end up in touchdowns. That's second in the country. I'm just going to control F Clemson here, and Clemson is 68th in the nation. So that's a pretty big gap there. And if you can't run the ball in the red zone, that's a problem. And when we watched the SEC championship game, we saw Arch Manning in there like once or twice, and it was like, well, it feels like they should be trying, putting him in the red zone and using him more in these situations because it was not working at all with Quinn Ewers in there, just because they couldn't get any kind of a run established against Georgia. They were running it effectively against Clemson, and they played more Arch Manning in this game than they did in the Georgia game. And they had him in there and just had him handed off on the first drive. That got stuffed. There was one where he later in the game took a snap, rolled right, and just kind of picked up a first down on like a 3rd and 3, 3rd and 4 kind of play. He was running QB power inside the 5. That one got stuffed. They had a 4th and 1 QB keeper late in the game when they were trying to seal it, and it looked like he just never got the snap. But it was like 1 for 4 on Arch Manning plays working in this one. So, I now kind of feel like maybe, I was looking at Arch Manning and going, well, this isn't working, so maybe that will work. And then you watch the Arch Manning stuff not work against Clemson when other stuff is working. It's like, I don't know if there is a clean and easy solution for Texas in this case. Let's see. How about, let's say something nice, Tony. Gunnar Helm. Man, oh man, is that good? Is that dude good at football? He's their tight end. He is such a big part of their passing attack. And we've seen, this is a year when I feel like we've been talking a lot about tight ends. Tyler Warren at Penn State. Spent a bunch of time talking about Terrence Ferguson at Oregon, Max Clare at Purdue, who's now transferring to Ohio State. You've seen G. Scott have a big year for Ohio State, at least on the scale of Ohio State tight end years go. But Gunnar Helm is a really, really big part of this Texas offense. And part of that is I think there's a drop-off behind Matthew Golden in terms of the quality of Texas's receivers overall. Gunnar Helm, probably one of their 2 best receivers on that offense altogether. But he had a touchdown pass right before halftime. He had they hit him with a screen at one point for a really nice pickup. They use him in a bunch of different ways, but he is, you think he kind of fits, to me, sort of what Michigan does with Colston Loveland, where it feels like he's a pretty early read in a lot of those progressions, and he can do a lot of different stuff with the ball in his hands.
Yeah, he can be a downfield guy down the seam. He can be a screen guy. 77 yards on 6 catches, long of 19. He's just a consistent chain mover, and he can be an outlet. He can be whatever you need, and they use him well. He's got over 50 catches this year, and he's somebody that's going to have to be dealt with, whether it's Sonny Styles or Jordan Hancock or whomever. Like he's a legit guy, and is a real part of their passing game. One of the issues I've seen with maybe the Texas receivers is the hands aren't always there, and stuff that they should catch goes right through their hands. I think one of Quinn Ewers' interceptions in this game, maybe the one interception was a bobbled pass that should have been caught. And so just the lack of consistency. They're all talented. Like Matthew Golden's very talented. We saw him go off in the Georgia game, and Ryan Wingo is a 5-star kid that has a ton of talent. And you watch Silas Bolden, and he's got some Tez Johnson to him, where he's fast and quick, not the biggest guy, but you don't want to deal with him in space. But again, he had one catch for 9 yards in this one, Wingo 2 for 23, and Golden 2 for 49. So yeah, there's potential there, but I guess when they're running the ball as well as they have, as well as they did in this one, the passing is going to come down for sure. But I still think when I'm watching Quinn Ewers, I don't know where the fear factor is for the Ohio State defense. You hear the Ohio State players talk about he can make all of the throws, and he can, but he doesn't do it consistently enough. And I will say he had time to throw in this one, and that helped him, and the offensive line played pretty well. And we could probably talk about the offensive line in a bit, losing 2 guys in the second half that maybe impacted the running game as well. But overall, there was one play where Quinn Ewers is kind of scrambling a little bit, and then he just slides down for a 4-yard loss rather than throwing it away. What was that? I didn't understand that. So there's just sometimes those plays. It's like, what was that? And you throw some YOLO balls here and there, and you can't do that when you don't know if your guy is going to be able to make the play. If your guy is even over there, they can't be wasting snaps against Ohio State. And I think he wastes too many.
Yeah. And I hear people say that he can make all the throws, and it's like Quinn Ewers can make all the throws. Like I can remember to load the dishwasher before I go to bed and not get yelled at by my wife in the morning. Like, yeah, I can do that. And sometimes, Tony, I load the dishes before I go to bed at night and don't get yelled at in the morning. And sometimes, what about the other times? Listen, Tony, we're here to talk football, not about my home life. I don't know why you're bringing that up, and I will thank you to not do it again. Quinn Ewers is like, he has the talent. But even on the broadcast, on that the 4-yard loss that you were talking about, where he's like rolling to his right and then slides down and takes a 3-4 yard loss, it's like you're out of the pocket. You could just throw the ball away. Like you had no one. You were not imminently going to get hit. It just was like a lack of awareness. Which, as a 3rd-year starter now for Texas, like that's the kind of play that you should like. That should be second nature. Like, I'm outside the pocket. I know where I am on the field. I know where I am compared to the line of scrimmage. I know I can throw the ball away. Like, there's no reason not to do that. And they talked about it on the broadcast that it's like, this is the things that the Texas people get upset about and get frustrated with Quinn Ewers about. And so it's obviously not the first time that this has happened. I did think it was interesting that we have not seen him run at all. We didn't see him run at all in the Georgia game, and he was wearing that big, bulky ankle brace, and they said he was wearing the ankle brace again in this game, although they weren't sure he was going to need it. His ankle was better than it had been. He did have one nice scramble up the middle where it was definitely not a designed run. I don't think we've seen them call a design run for him yet in these 2 games we've watched, but he did pick up like 10, 12 yards, something like that, on a nice little scramble up the middle. So that was a good positive thing for him that we hadn't seen yet. So that's an encouraging thing. But yeah, the passing game is just not quite there. It's all just that much off. It's just not quite there. And it feels like they have kind of all the pieces you would think they would need to be able to do that. I mean, we talked about how Matthew Golden, he's number 2. He's their top receiver. He had a great catch, like fighting through contact downfield. He drew a couple pass interference calls. He put up some nice numbers in this game. He's been very impressive both games. The rest of the receivers are good, and you see them make plays, but it's just a little inconsistent. And I think we're a little spoiled watching Ohio State every week, where it's like, yeah, Carnell Tate's the 3rd receiver. Like, Carnell Tate might be the number 1 receiver on this team, and if not, he's absolutely number 2 by a mile. You're kind of having the same conversations we had about like Oregon or about Tennessee, where it's like, yeah, the receivers, you got like a real good receiver, like Dante Thornton for Tennessee, like, man, big play threat. That's what Golden is. After Dante Thornton for Tennessee, it was like, yeah, they got some other guys that can do it, but they don't always catch the ball, and they're not always getting open. And it feels like we're having some of the same conversations about Texas that were about some of those other teams. And you saw how those games played out in terms of opponents being able to throw the ball consistently against Ohio State. So I think that would be a concern. One thing that, Tony, that is not a concern at all, let's go to the other side of the ball and let's talk about Gerdeman Barron, because I think we went through the entire last show without talking about him, because we were just kind of like making notes and just like, oh, I saw this guy. And Gerdeman Barron is a corner. We didn't see him last game because Georgia did not throw the ball at him. And we barely saw him in this game because Clemson really did not throw the ball at him. He won the Thorpe Award this year. He's pretty good at football. Turns out he's a pretty good corner. He broke up up 2 passes in the first couple drives, which is the only reason I kind of, oh yeah, I forgot about him. And then you didn't really see him much of the rest of the game. There is a corner that people will go after, and we'll get to him maybe later on in the show. But I mean, man, Barron is one of those guys who he's so good that you like forget he's there.
Yeah, right away. I think the first note I have is there's a nice pass breakup on a slant from Barron, and he got right in there. And then there was another one later in the game where I'm like, is that a PBU? Is that just a drop? It doesn't matter. He was right there to make a play, and he can play outside. He can play inside. He'll go wherever. There was one point where Clemson had been moving the ball. I think this is in the 3rd quarter. And he's given it to Malik Muhammad, who is one of the other corners. And to me, I don't know who was in the wrong, but I'm guessing I do know who was in the wrong, based on how that conversation was going and how the game had gone for both of those players. But if If Barron is in the slot, that's going to be a fun matchup with whoever is in there. And if he's not, that'll be a fun matchup as well. I know Texas plays a lot of zone. They were having some issues, I think, in man when they went man. You saw that whether it was the crossing routes, the meshes, or even downfield against Malik
Muhammad.
Malik Muhammad with TJ Moore, who's an outstanding receiver for Clemson. So it will be interesting to see how much zone they play in this one, where they just kind of drop back, maybe rush 4 or 5, and try to keep everything in front of them. It will require Ohio State to be patient, but also Ohio State's one of the best teams in the nation against the zone as well. So pick your poison on what you want to give up. Is it, death by 1,000 cuts, or is it death by 1 or 2? And I thought that first drive for Clemson, they marched right down the field, but they were patient. It was a dink and dunk to death, and it led to a touchdown, one of their few touchdowns early on. So they had a good game plan for that. But I like Texas's corners, but once they found the matchup in the third quarter with TJ Moore against Malik Muhammad, they went after it and went after it and went after it, and they kept making Texas pay for that. And as we know, if there's a weak spot in the secondary, you got to go find it. And I will also say, Tom, we spent some of the last show raving about the Texas safeties and Michael Taff and Andrew Makuba, and really didn't see much from them in this game. And I don't know if it's because of the lack of the running game. There's nobody to tackle, because of the linebackers already getting to it, or what. Like, I know they're very good, and they were good in the last game. I'm still waiting to see what they look like against a dynamic passing attack.
Yeah, and that was, if you don't notice safeties, that's not necessarily a bad thing, as long as the ball's not going over their head. And their ball wasn't going over their head in this case. So this is one where, based on them looking good in the first game and not looking bad in the second game, I'm going to grade them an incomplete on this one at worst. It just felt like Clemson was not hitting huge plays down the field all that consistently. And when they were, the number you saw on the back of the Texas defender was 5, which was Malik Muhammad. Like, he got picked on. And that was TJ Moore, freshman receiver. Not all of his catches were against Muhammad, but he had a season-high 9 catches and a season-high 116 yards. And that's a true freshman who is not Jeremiah Smith. So, I think if I'm, as you said, I don't think Texas is going to just go straight up man coverage and just have Barron shadow Jeremiah Smith around the field. But it's a little like the Tennessee game, where we spent a bunch of games watching Tennessee and going, boy, that Jamon McCoy is a really good corner. Whoever Ricky Gibson is on might have a big night. If it is man coverage, boy, that Jahdae Barron is a good corner. Whoever Malik Muhammad is on might have a big night. Like that, it feels like we might be trending in that kind of direction. Again, if it's man coverage, we'll see. If it's zone, that obviously complicates the picture a little bit. Jalen Gilbo is another defensive back we should mention. He had a couple plays. You saw him a little bit in coverage, and he gave up some completions. But you saw him come off the edge a couple times and have a couple big blitzes. I think one of them they got a tackle for loss, and another they really impacted the play. So he's someone to keep an eye on as well.
My turn, Tom?
Yep.
How about losing center Jake Majors and right tackle Connor Williams? I think they both went down towards, I think Connor Williams went down late in the first half and then tried to go back in, and then he was out for the rest of the game, and he did not play against Arizona State. Jake Majors, their starting center, went down, and they moved a guard over, as we've seen Ohio State do. And I think it's interesting that the game sealing touchdown was a 77-yarder behind their All-American left tackle. So they kind of just avoided the whole middle and right side of the situation and said, let's just go behind the guy that we know we can trust. And they did that, and they managed. And then Jake Majors will play in the Arizona State game. So I don't know what Connor Williams' situation is at this point.
He was back at practice. He was practicing again as of, I think, a day or two ago. So it looks like he might be back.
Good. That would be good for them. And they've got their number 3 tackle. We've seen him start start last week at left tackle and then also play right tackle in this one. He's kind of a swing guy. Ohio State has the same thing at times. But being able to withstand that and be able to clinch the game on the run, I thought was impressive for them because nobody needs to tell Ohio State fans listening to this what it's like to lose a center and a starting tackle and then come through okay with it. And so you'll get those guys back. But I think that's an important thing to note in this game when you are running the ball so well and then things start to slow down in the second half in this game, especially when Clemson kind of knows you're trying to run it as well.
Sure. Yeah. I didn't mark down anything negative about the Texas ground game in the second half for both of the reasons you just said there. Trevor Gooseby is the guy who's sort of their swing tackle. We saw him playing left tackle for Kelvin Banks, the really, really good left tackle. He missed the SEC championship game, was back for this one. And then Cameron Williams, who was a little shaky at right tackle in the SEC championship game, he looked really good in this one. Now, I think that maybe if you can run the ball, boy, that really changes what the defense has in front of it. I think that may be part of it. But, then he went down with the knee injury, and Gooseby was fine at right tackle even after that. But, it definitely, it would be interesting to get to see a full game with Williams and Banks at tackle and see what that looks like. We haven't gotten a chance to see that yet. And Williams does not play in the Arizona State game, but as I said, there was a report that he was back at practice, so actively practicing. So that's potentially good news for them. Let's see, where else should we go with this? The defensive line continues to be really, really impressive for Texas. Sorrell, the number 88, he had a really nice sack against Blake Miller, which is a name that Ohio State fans will know. He's a guy from Northern Ohio who ended up going to Clemson, has been a pretty solid right tackle for them. And then Sorrell just went right around him. But you're seeing a lot of, he had another one later where he batted a pass in the air that was intercepted by Colin Simmons. Like Texas's defensive line in this, some of the push they got, there was a goal line stand right at the end of the game when Clemson was down at the 2-yard line, 1-yard line, and had 3-4 cracks to get it in. Couldn't get it in. And never even, they ran multiple plays from the 1-yard line. And it was like, there was never a moment where you thought, oh, they're going to get this in. Like it was just running face first into a wall, basically, for Cade Klubnik or whoever had the ball for Clemson on those plays. The defensive line for Texas reminds me maybe more in terms of how they looked in this game to how the Ohio State defensive line has looked, where they're batting passes up in the air. They're really locking down the run game kind of consistently. They were getting a lot of pressure on the quarterback. They're getting sacks. This was a really, really good performance for the defensive line. And I don't know that Clemson has an amazing offensive line, but they don't have a terrible offensive line. They were reasonably successful this season, and so if you're able to put together that kind of performance against that kind of team, like the Texas defensive line made Clemson's offensive line the way that Ohio State's defensive line made Tennessee's offensive line look. It was a very similar kind of performance. And, I think that's something that through 2 games, I think we've both come away pretty impressed with, Vernon Broughton. I mean, all those guys on the Texas defensive line. It is an impressive unit all the way across.
Yeah. Number 91 defensive end, Ethan Burke, another guy who has flashed in these first 2 games. 4 tackles, a tackle and a half, including a sack in this one. So they're getting pressure from all of their defensive linemen. We mentioned Colin Simmons, the true freshman. He had an interception on a tipped pass, as you said. Before that, maybe the player that played before that one, he had pressure on Cade Klubnik and got in there. And I thought he forced a fumble, but he doesn't have one in the box score. I think maybe they called it an incomplete or something of that nature, but he got right in there and got to Klubnik, and he's going to be an issue for whoever is playing against him on his side. And really all 3 of these guys that we've mentioned, and then the interior, it's not the same interior as they've had in the past, but it's still Texas defensive tackles. They're going to be fine. They're going to be good. And it's going to be a challenge for the Ohio State offensive line as a whole. And this will be the best defense Ohio State has faced since Michigan. But I think this is a better overall back 7 than Michigan. So even once you get past that front 4, you're going to have more to deal with from the Longhorns than you did the Wolverines. But of course, you've got a different game plan now than you did back then. You're running a bunch more counter. You're running, more wide stuff, and just not keeping things as simple as they were against Michigan and the games leading up to that, frankly, too. So this one, in terms of, I think we're going to see a bunch of eye candy from both teams. And the thing that got better for Texas in this one is the last game, there was way too much slow developing stuff. This time there's like half as much that still was not effective. They cut it down, but it still wasn't effective. So I think against a smart veteran defense like Ohio State, I don't know how smart the slow developing throwback stuff, roll left, throw back to Gunnar Helm or whomever on the other side of the field is going to go for Texas in this one.
Yeah, you've seen that. I feel like we've seen the further you get into the playoffs, the more you're seeing, like, we're watching these games, we're going, boy, this defense is really smart and really disciplined, and they don't get fooled by that stuff. There's probably not a coincidence that those are the defenses that are still playing. But yeah, I'm with you. I think that's something that, the coaches always want to draw up the real fun plays, and oh boy, this is going to work great. And you know what? It always wins on the whiteboard, but it doesn't necessarily win on the field. But Sark, you talked about the eye candy with Texas's offense, and a lot of that is pre-snap as well. And they showed a stat on the broadcast that Texas used motion on 58% of its first half snaps. They averaged 9 yards per play on those and had 4 touchdowns. All 4 touchdowns came on plays where they used pre-snap motion. So you're going to, and this is not a new thing. This is something we talk about all the time with Ross Fulton on the X's and O's shows, is how you can use pre-snap motion to, sort of figure out what kind of coverage the opposing team is in, or to shift yourself into some advantageous matchups depending on, formation. So, that's something that Sark is very good at as well. So this is going to be a fun X's and O's, matchup between Jim Knowles and Sark. So and Kyle Flood, they mentioned Kyle Flood's name on the broadcast, and they went, oh yeah, Kyle Flood, former Rutgers head coach Kyle Flood, now the offensive coordinator at Texas. It's always so fun when you get the, oh yeah, I haven't thought about him in a while. You mentioned Ethan Burke earlier, one of the defensive ends who got home. I think his sack came on a TE stunt, which is this is a stunt where the tackle goes first and then the end kind of loops around. So that's why it's a TE. We saw that in the SEC championship game as well. They got a sack, I believe, or at least a pressure on one of those. So that's something that Ohio State's going to have to keep an eye on. Speaking of the Ross Fulton shows, why do I know what a TE stunt is? Well, thank you, Ross. So let's see what else. Texas has given up 17 points in the first quarter of its first 13 games of the season. I thought that was a pretty impressive stat. And they gave up 4 passing touchdowns in their first 13 games, and then gave up 3 passing touchdowns in this game. So, it's this kind of goes back to a point that you made on the last show, which is, the stats are great, and you kind of wonder, okay, how good are the offenses they've faced, and how good are the passing offenses they've faced? Because it feels like it's real stratified in the sport of college football right now, where you got some really good passing offenses, and you get a whole bunch that are not even close to really good.
Yeah, and I thought this was not a great Clemson offense. They had some good people, some good players, but overall, it's not a primetime test for Texas like Ohio State will be. And maybe Texas will be up for it, but they were certainly up for this one. I don't know that it was the biggest challenge, and I think you can credit some of Clemson's comeback to Texas being up by 3 touchdowns, and credit them for not giving up. But also, we've seen that happen before over the years, where you get up 3 touchdowns and you kind of start to pack it in a little bit, and you let down, and especially at the half. And so I think overall, once Clemson did get back to 7 points, the very next play, I believe, is Jaden Blue going for 7, and it's like, well, that's ball game. Everybody have fun. And then they had a goal line stand after that. So they may have let up a little bit, but then they stood on Clemson's necks and just stopped them from doing anything. So that's about all I got. You got anything else?
The only other thing I had was how good Texas's kickoff coverage was in this game. And, covering Ohio State, we know that's really completely irrelevant to what this game is going to be, because Ohio State has stopped trying to return kickoffs like a decade ago functionally. They had back-to-back tackles where they were running the ball. Clemson, opted to try to return it, try and get something going, and then Texas tackled them, I think, inside the 20 or around the 20. They had one kind of wonky punt return in this one where one of their blockers collided with the returner as they, and he kind of juggled the ball. They got it back, wasn't a big deal. Matthew Golden had one where he tried to return a kickoff like 5 yards deep in the end zone and got tackled at about the 15. That was not a great decision, but the kickoff coverage was good. I don't remember thinking anything outstanding one way or the other about the punting game or punt coverage, which means the punt coverage is probably fine. So, I think good, solid special teams, as you said, Bert Auburn, the kicker, he was not called on to do anything in this game, but based on the season stats that we gave you the last time, you kind of know that that's a little bit of an adventure sometimes.
Well, he drilled a 22-yard field goal, Tom, so I don't know what you're talking about. And the reason you didn't see much punt coverage is because Texas only punted once. And so you will need to force more than just one punt in this game this week. So there you go. Our second look at the Texas Longhorns. We will finish up this series with a look at the Arizona State game. Only got to see some of that sparingly while at the bowl trip back in Pasadena recently. Boy, what a week. What a couple of weeks. So we'll have that one coming for you shortly. So thank you all for tuning in. Hit the thumbs up on this one if you're watching on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so yet. Hit the bell to be notified. And, of course, you can find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Sign up. First month, just $4.99. Check us out there on the Buckeye Huddle message board presented by Jeff Ruby's Columbus, where we're talking about this and so much more. So thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you guys later.